The last week has been one of the craziest in the world of DeFi for a little while. There were a ton of exploits and affected some of the largest protocols around in DeFi, specifically Curve Finance. Today what I thought we'll do is we'll talk about all of the events that have happened in chronological order so that you guys can get a good appreciation of exactly what happened. So as always, let's get straight to it. So we're going to talk about the various different exploits, the Curve exploit. I mean, to be honest, Curve itself didn't get exploited, but we're going to cover everything so you know exactly what happened. There were a ton of protocols affected and there was lots of drama as well, including talking about Michael, the founder of Curve, and his positions that were affected as well. So lots of things happened. Anyway, let's go to the very, very start. Back in a few days back, 30th of July, where we saw PeckShield tweet this. Hi JPEGd, you may want to take a look at this. And they've sent this Ethereum transaction hash, which we can then take a look at and see. There were a lot of ETH being withdrawn from this contract. So what actually happened? Well, what we do know is JPEG, they have a derivative called PETH, just like Alchemix do, with Alchemix, ETH, and Metronome as well, 3 different protocols, and sadly all 3 were affected. What happened exactly? Well, we know that all 3 of them were exploited. JPEGd at around 9:10 Eastern time, then Metronome and Alchemix not long after. And later on in the day we saw one of the Curve pools actually affected. Now what was actually affected? Well, it wasn't actually these protocols themselves, rather it was one of their Curve pools. Now all of these protocols have Ethereum derivatives which are paired, pooled on Curve Finance. Now, what actually happened on Curve? Well, I think we need to go and look into that to kind of really appreciate exactly what happened. And essentially what happened was there was what's known as a re-entry attack. And essentially what a re-entry attack is when you can essentially trick a smart contract into basically taking more money than it should allow you to normally. I'll leave this thread in the description below by Only One Temi. It's pretty good at explaining exactly what happened. What actually, in terms of on Curve, what was exploited? Well, it actually wasn't any of the smart contracts. Rather, some of these pools, specifically only these ones, were running an older version of Viper, which is the coding language used to code for some of these pools on Curve. And they were using an older compiler of Viper, which had this potential exploit. And this was probably around for maybe 12 to 18 months. So it's quite surprising actually that we've actually waited this long for this exploit to happen. It could have happened any time in the last 18 months. What we do know is that the majority of the other pools on Curve were unaffected. And that's because they were using newer versions of this compiler, this Viper compiler. So that's pretty much what happened. There was a re-entry attack, and unfortunately those pools were affected. What we can see here is the various different addresses, the projects involved, and the amount of ETH. And this was a substantial amount, over $26 million. Now, thankfully, some of these transactions were front-run by MEV bots like coffeebabe.eth, and thankfully these funds were returned. What we did find later though is that, here's Curve Finance basically saying that a number of stable pools, this Alchemix ETH, Metronome ETH pool and PETH pool, were using Viper 0215 and there was a re-entrancy attack. The other pools were completely safe because they were using newer versions of Viper. What we did find though later on in the day, a few hours after, was that the CRV ETH pool was completely drained, and this was quite a substantial pool. Imagine ETH CRV. You've got a lot of assets in here, and you can see that there was 7 million Curve tokens, a really substantial amount, plus a lot of ETH as well. As you can imagine, there was lots of panic in the market. This was another exploit following, the ones that we saw with JPEG, Alchemix, and Metronome. And you can see that, Curve price went from, above 70 cents all the way down to in the 40s, the high 40s. And this was quite concerning for one person in particular. And that's because they had a huge Curve loan that was at risk of liquidation. Well, who was that? It's no one else other than the founder of Curve, Michael. And Michael had a huge loan. He had a loan of $100 million borrowed against $280 million of CRV at the time as collateral. And he went and, bought himself this lovely mansion in Australia a while back. So yeah, essentially what it means is, Michael's getting close to liquidation. How is he going to pay back his loan? It would be catastrophic if he were to get liquidated. With, first of all, there not being enough liquidity on chain to eat up that huge amount of CRV tokens, and also the widespread effects that would bring in DeFi when everything runs on curve. We can see everyone was tracking his wallet. This is Michael's wallet. Everyone was tracking it, and it was really nice to be able to see this in real time. Today, his wallet is 192 million, but I think at the time it was significantly worse. And essentially what he had was on AAVE, you can provide CRV tokens as collateral. He had borrowed assets against this. And the same thing on Fraxlend as well, which is Frax lending product. You can lend out CRV and borrow Frax against it. Now, the AAVE one, whilst being a lot bigger in size, wasn't as worrying as the one on Frax, and that's because Frax have this innovative model, this time-weighted variable interest rate. So let's have a look and see exactly what happened. So Michael Egorov currently had at the time, we're talking about a few days back. He had a $100 million loan backed by 427 million CRV tokens, which was actually 47% of the circulating supply, a huge amount. And this loan was potentially going to get liquidated at the price of 0.37 cents. What we can see is that price went very, very close to that. Another 10-20%, and he would be in big trouble. Only a 30% drop in curve price, for that to occur. Now he had a substantially more on AAVE than Frax. On Frax, he only had 60 million CRV tokens supplied. But because Fraxlend has this time-weighted variable interest rate, where at 100% utilization, the interest rate starts to double every 12 hours. And that's exactly what happened. Utilization was at 100% on Frax Finance, and essentially that meant that the interest rate was literally doubling and doubling every 12 hours. So you can see what this effect would have on the interest rate if he were to just wait a few days. You're talking about 4 or 5 figure interest rates. Ultimately, he would get liquidated eventually at that level of interest rate. And so what could he do? Well, he started to rush to kind of repay back some of this loan on Frax. But where's he getting the money from? He's taken his money out and he's bought himself this beautiful mansion over here. So that's when there was a bit of panic, and that's when we saw lots of issues. So the first thing that Michael did was he actually deployed a new curve pool, and this was basically a tokenized version of his Frax lend position and paired it against CRV USD. And this this was gaining a lot of CRV rewards. The APR was really high, and so that did attract a fair amount of liquidity, and that did help to decrease his utilization rate to it's still around 90%. Ultimately, though, that wasn't enough, and we saw him scrambling around to basically protect his health factor, and what we did see is that he was getting $10,000 to $20,000 in batches from here, there, and everywhere to just help repay back this loan, and he was trying to do this as quick as possible. Ultimately, though, he had no option. He had to OTC sell some of the CRV to other people. Now, obviously, he couldn't do this on the market because there just wasn't enough liquidity. Only a few $1 million of liquidity on-chain and off-chain. So what choice did he have? He had to basically find some of the biggest names in crypto: Wintermute, DWF Labs, Justin Sun, DCF God, the Yearn Treasury, C2TP, and StakeDAO, and various other people. You can see exactly how much everyone got, and this was all done at a price of $0.4. So obviously they're getting a great deal because today they're already up 50% on that investment. But yeah, unfortunate for Michael, he had no other choice. He couldn't sell on the market. He needed to raise funds, and in the end, he had to get rid of 100 million CRV tokens, which is really a substantial amount. He was able to generate 42 million, and he was able to use that to pay back most of his loans. So that was the end of that drama. In terms of kind of the exploits, what happened? Well, thankfully, the JPEGd exploiter did return the ETH. Similarly, the Alchemix exploiter did the same. Unfortunately, though, the CRV ETH exploiter hasn't yet given back the funds, and Curve did actually give him a deadline, or him or her a deadline which has now passed. And so now there is a 10% bounty for anyone who's able to identify that person and lead to their arrest or capture or whatever. And so we're waiting to see kind of what happens there. Either way, it's been a pretty exciting time. Exciting? That's probably not the right word. It's been a pretty interesting time. We've seen large amounts of volatility in the DeFi ecosystem, and it was really interesting to see. I think overall it's nice to see that Curve is a little bit more distributed, or CRV tokens are a little bit more distributed. But I'm just very grateful that there was a solution or resolution to this overall, and there wasn't more kind of damage to the market. So yeah, all I wanted to do was just basically showcase exactly what happened in order of time. I hope that kind of makes sense to all of you. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll be back with plenty more content in the near future.